Good afternoon and welcome to the March 8th Q&A virtual lunch hour with me, Jason Killeen. I'm an assistant executive director with the Department of Cannabis Regulation, and I oversee the department's administrative, licensing, compliance, and enforcement divisions. So welcome. Just a couple brief updates for today, and I'm sure there's going to be questions about that, some of these issues. With the state's upcoming deadline, the state has a March 31st deadline for social equity entrepreneurs to submit new provisional license applications. Social equity individual applicants may submit an application to the state without anything from DCR. So for folks that are looking to apply for a provisional license, you don't need anything from DCR to submit your actual application to the state. When the state reaches out to DCR to verify local compliance underway, that's when you're going to have to make sure that you have a temporary approval application in our queue and you've submitted the required documents. As folks know, we've implemented a new legal business entity record, which we rolled out last fall. On the legal business entity record, that's where we review the applicant entity, we do the equity share review, but that's separate and apart from the actual temporary approval application. When you submit the updated temporary approval application, we're looking at the business premises diagram, the lease, the attestations, and the indemnification agreement tied to that business and that location. So folks are able to get to a status of local compliance underway much more quickly. And then we, of course, have the ability to vet the equity share review and the ownership documents on a separate record so that we can get you what you need to meet the state's deadlines. The other big update is the director has decided to use her discretion to provide fee deferrals for all social equity applicants that submit applications between now and April 30th. On May 1st, we're going to go ahead and open up the annual licensing program, and then we'll be able to start providing fee waivers through the LJAG grant program to all applicants. But in order to have people start in the annual application process and be eligible for the waivers, we will need the city council to adopt an ordinance effectuating the recommendations that were recently passed by the city council. And because right now under current law, you have to have temporary approval to be eligible to start the environmental review, and you have to complete the environmental review before you're eligible to submit your annual application. So once these ordinance amendments get adopted and they become effective, we'll be able to have people start immediately in the annual application process, start doing the environmental in parallel with the document review so that you can get into the state queue much more seamlessly and be able to pursue annual licensure with the state. As we transition to opening the annual application process on May 1st, we will also be starting to upload notices of completion and notifying folks that we've completed the environmental document associated with their existing temporary approval records. The key to the May 1st date is also the state's going to have new requirements coming into play on July 1st of 2023. So a business will need to demonstrate that they have met the notice of completion requirement in order to renew their provisional license. So May 1st would be the first day that somebody whose license expires on June 30th would be eligible to renew their state provisional license. So we're going to make sure that folks have the necessary documentation, provided they've submitted their 4013 forms and we've had the opportunity to review. So if you are a business that will be renewing your license at the state level after July 1st, 2023, it's very important to make sure that you've submitted your 4013 form to us so that we can prepare our draft environmental review document so that you can meet the notice of completion requirements and be eligible to renew your state provisional license after July 1st. So if you haven't already submitted your 4013 and you have temporary approval and a state provisional license, get that into us as soon as possible so that we can go ahead and do those reviews. And just a reminder for folks, the LJAG grant is a funding source that allows us to provide fee waivers for all applicants as we complete our initial environmental review of your project. So as long as it qualifies for a categorical exemption, then there won't be any environmental fees that you as an applicant would have to pay. And then, of course, once we've completed that analysis, we're able under local law to start transitioning people into the annual application process. And we also are going to be using the LJAG grant monies to provide fee waivers. All in all, the businesses that have received temporary approval and the businesses that are pursuing a license with us, everybody in the queue will be eligible for full fee deferrals for their annual application. And, you know, that will exhaust all $22 million, plus doing the environmental studies that will help update and facilitate a smoother transition to annual licensure in the future. So with that, those are my welcoming remarks. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll go ahead and jump into the Q&A.
All righty, thanks, Jason. Our first question is from Jesse F. and Rafi S. Are there any updates on the PCN process and when it will reopen? We are phase 2 cultivation and having problems with our landlord.
So the PCN process will open later this year. At this time, I don't have an anticipated date. There's a few policy considerations that the city council wants to make before we reopen that process. If you are a phase 2 business and you're having issues with your landlord, if you have an application pending and you lose site control and you submit your business premises surrender form, that will result in the abandonment of the record. And then you will have the opportunity to refile your record based on the law that was recently adopted. A cultivation application can be refiled in any community plan area that has not reached undue concentration. So that may help facilitate you going to a compliant location if you're having issues with your landlord. If you have a license, then the license can be relocated under current law within your existing community plan area, and you can submit a business premises relocation form. And under the adopted recommendations, the law will be amended in the near future to allow for DCR to consider business premises relocations for licenses outside of the community plan area, provided that community plan has not reached undue concentration. So if you're an applicant, there's a path forward for you through the refiling process. If you're a licensee and you want to relocate within the community plan area, you can submit that request now. If you look to move to a different community plan area, once the law gets amended to adopt our recent changes, you'll have that opportunity. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, moving on. From Jesse F. and Christian C. How likely is it that the provisional license deadline is extended?
So SB 51 is a bill to extend the state's provisional deadline beyond March 31st. It's scheduled for a public hearing on March 27th, and an urgency clause has been attached. Honestly, based on the timing of the hearing, it's unlikely that anything would happen on or before March 31st for full adoption and implementation. So we're working with the state partners with the assumption that the March 31st deadline is going to come, and it's going to have the Department of Cannabis Control, which is the state agency for provisional licensure, will stop accepting new applications for provisional licenses from social equity applicants at that point in time. So again, at the local level, we'll be providing fee deferrals to all social equity applicants so that we can immediately begin working on your records in the hopes of you being able to, meet the state's deadlines. And again, you don't need anything from DCR in order to submit your state provisional application. You will just need to have a status of local compliance underway prior to the state issuing the provisional license. And they reach out to us directly to verify whether or not the business has a status of local compliance underway. And that comes within the 60-day processing period for their provisional license. So you don't need to have a status of local compliance underway by May or March 31st. You could get that status in May and still be eligible to receive a provisional license. And the Department of Cannabis Control has the discretion to continue issuing provisional licenses through June 30th of 2023 under the current law. So those are kind of the parameters that we're working under as an agency, and we're going to try to do our best to help facilitate people getting into the state queue and clearing the state queue as efficiently as possible by using the general manager's discretionary authority to provide fee deferrals.
Thanks, Jason. Our next question comes from Majib S. What is the best time to file an application?
I mean, the best time to file is going to be when you're in a position to navigate through the full application process. DCR has broken up the application process into bite-sized chunks. Folks can get their BTRC. They can submit a legal business entity record. The legal business entity record, you don't have to have, a proposed business location. You don't have to have site control. We're just vetting your business. We can do equity share review on that record. We've got a standalone pre-application review process. So if you have a proposed business premises location, we can vet it for compliance with LEMC 105 and distancing from sensitive uses before you actually sign a lease and get site control. And, if you clear the pre-app review process, you have up to a year to submit your application. So those are kind of the things that we've put in place. Really, when you submit your application, you're going to have site control, which means you're either going to have a deed for the property or an active lease so that you can get in. And, we want to reduce the holding cost for applicants between the time that they secure a location and when they're going to be eligible to operate at that location. So we're kind of rejiggering the process to reduce those holding costs and hopefully be in a position to move people forward more expeditiously in our local process as well as the state's process. If you're ready to rock and roll, you can submit all of those different records simultaneously. If you're not, you can at least get your LBER, the legal business entity record, submitted. If you're a social equity business, you can go through the equity share review and then have peace of mind that you've done those processes so that once you submit the application, it's really going to be associated with time, place, manner. Do you have site control? Have you submitted your premises diagram? Have you submitted all the attestations, the indemnification agreement? Can you pass an initial inspection? And those are the hurdles locally that you have to clear in order to get temporary approval. I hope that helps.
Majib has a follow-up question. He says, I own 4351 West Pico Boulevard. May I have a license here?
Without having done a land use review, I don't know if it's properly zoned, et cetera. If you go through the pre-application review process, we can actually vet the location for compliance, and you can identify what commercial cannabis activities you would be applying for so that we can make sure that those activities would be compliant at that location. So if you haven't already done so, I would recommend submitting the pre-app review. If you do want to get an official response from the department about whether or not that proposed location and address complies with Los Angeles Municipal Code Section 105.
Okay. The next three questions have to do with CEQA. They're each different. So I'll start with the first one from Maurice C. and Tim A. Have any licenses in the city of Los Angeles received their CEQA documents to proceed with annual licensure?
So I'm gonna break that up into two pieces. So no LA-based business has had their environmental review document adopted by the city, because we can only adopt that finding in conjunction with the discretionary action, which is the issuance of the annual license that it's tied to. So nobody has adopted environmental documents for CEQA purposes. However, DCR will begin issuing notices of completion in May. A notice of completion is a brief notice released by the lead agency, which in this case will be the Department of Cannabis Regulation, that we've completed a draft CEQA document for public review and comment. So we will start that in May. It ties directly into the opening of the annual application process. So once somebody has cleared the CEQA component, they're eligible to submit their annual application and begin that process, so we can adopt the finding with the recommendation to issue an annual license. So I'll be doing additional webinars later this month and next month, specifically on this topic to get people prepped. The notice of completion is going to be a requirement that the state has for renewal of provisional licenses beginning on July 1st of this year. So we're in a position to make sure our licensees can meet the updated state requirements as long as they've submitted their completed Form 4013, so we can do that analysis. And again, we will begin issuing those notices once the annual application process is formally started, and in time for folks that will be renewing in July to include it as part of their renewal application to the state.
Okay, our second question you may have answered previously in the previous answer, but I'll re-ask it. It's from Michaela S. and Alexis B. I'm looking for a CEQA update. Has the city of LA determined their CEQA process? When will the city begin to offer CEQA waivers for dispensary retailers who are applying for annual licenses with the DCC?
So the city of LA knows what its CEQA process is. For the purposes of the annual licensure, we will be the lead agency for businesses located within the city of LA. For businesses that have temporary approval, you're eligible to submit your Form 4013, which is the final draft environmental review document that we use to do our environmental analysis. It wasn't mandatory previously for folks to submit the 4013 once they received temporary approval. So we've done the initial analysis on the 4013s that have been submitted. We will be in a position to start posting notices of completion in May. Everybody who has submitted the 4013, that review has been conducted, and we have applied the fee waivers through the local jurisdictions assistance grant, which was the big grant that Dr. B and her team secured to help facilitate the conversion of provisional licenses into annual licenses. And then, of course, for other folks who have temporary approval and for businesses that are going to be going into our annual application pipeline, we will have grant monies to provide fee waivers for at least the initial review of those environmental documents. And if you qualify for a categorical exemption, there won't be any additional fees. And I think I got all of the question, I hope.
Okay, so moving on, the last question on CEQA for the time being, Darwin B asks, why is my licensure progress hampered by CEQA review that I'm told doesn't apply to SEAs or social equity applicants?
So CEQA review applies to all commercial cannabis licenses and applications. However, it's a requirement for the adoption of the recommendation to issue an annual license. So for businesses that are eligible to receive temporary approval, they didn't have to go through a CEQA process. However, with the state phasing out provisional licenses and requiring businesses to have annual licenses by the end of 2025 and stopping people from renewing provisional licenses beginning in 2025, that is going to require you to get the CEQA review completed so that you're eligible to get an annual license. So locally, our process was designed that businesses that got temporary approval were eligible to begin the CEQA review, and you had to complete the CEQA review before you could start your annual application. Again, the recommendations recently adopted by council, once they become law, will allow the department to do the application review, the environmental review, all in tandem, so that we can move people through the process more quickly as opposed to requiring them to sequentially jump through different hoops. Everybody has to go through CEQA review because that's a requirement under California law tied to the issuance of a discretionary permit for commercial cannabis activity. However, it wasn't required for the issuance of temporary approval or provisional licenses, which is why the city and the state utilized a temporary and provisional process in the first place.
Thank you, Jason. The next question comes from Maurice C. and IBN. When are licensees/applicants supposed to receive their notice of substantial progress, local environmental review document from the department? And do you know if DCC is requiring this form from social equity applicants at the state level?
So the notice of substantial progress, local environmental review, can be received once a status of local compliance underway has been applied to the application record. The letter was created to allow our existing licensees, both general and social equity applicants, to be able to renew the provisional license after July 1st of 2022. So it was really one of the first environmental update docs that the state required to continue allowing a business to have a provisional license. And now it's going to kind of move the goal line a little bit farther back, where people have to have those notices of completion in order to renew beginning July 1st of this year. Generally, that document was only necessary for the renewal of a provisional license. However, you can request one after you have the status of local compliance underway by reaching out to your analyst. For businesses that are in the pipeline now, when the state reaches out to issue an initial provisional license, we provide them updates that local compliance is underway and we've begun the CEQA review process, and that's a direct communication with the state. If the state, is asking you to provide that letter, please reach out to your analyst, because they can go ahead and get it generated on the record and help you with that.
Thank you, Jason. Maurice C. asks, do existing cultivation licensees need to apply for an additional local license to grow up to the maximum allotment of canopy per the LA Municipal Code?
The answer is you have to have a cultivation license consistent with your cultivation footprint. So if you have a specialty indoor, you can cultivate up to 5,000 square feet. If you have a medium indoor, you can go up to 22,000 square feet. Under the municipal code, a person may be the owner of up to 3 medium indoor licenses, which equates to about 1.5 acres of canopy space. So if you're trying to get to the 1.5 acres, you will need multiple licenses to achieve that. If you have a smaller cultivation license type, we have a modification process to basically bump you up to a larger cultivation type. And it's a fairly simple process that really requires you to submit an updated business premises diagram to show us where the additional activities are going to be happening. You may be doing stack beds, you may be building out a different part of the facility so that we can review the business premises diagram for compliance and do another initial inspection, and then you're good to go and use the extra capacity.
Okay. Darwin B asks, why do my delivery vehicles have to return to the hub location if I employ the ice cream truck delivery model?
So it's a nuanced question that really ties into the state's regulatory structure. Vehicles can only have a certain amount of cannabis in them at any given time. So, to the extent that you stay within that threshold and orders are coming in and you're fulfilling the orders within that threshold, you're okay. But you can't go over the limit of how much cannabis is allowed to be in a single vehicle to continue basically fulfilling orders throughout the day if those orders exceed what you're allowed to have in the vehicle at any one time. So returning to the hub effectively allowed you to replenish the allotted cannabis that can be in the vehicle so that you can continue to fulfill orders. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Jason. Brandon M asks, is there an update on unincorporated LA County licensing?
DCR doesn't have any jurisdiction of the areas outside of the city of LA. The LA County Office of Cannabis Management has a website where you can probably get additional information. I know that their office is working with the supervisors to implement a regulatory structure, but it's still being built out.
Okay, thanks, Jason. This also has to do with city versus LA County. Luis Yu asks, is the license for the city of Los Angeles or the county of Los Angeles?
DCR can only issue licenses within the city of Los Angeles that we have oversight of. So everything that DCR deals with is for businesses that would be operating within the city of Los Angeles.
Okay, our next question from Nick S. Will DCR help us, those who have been convicted and went to prison, be eligible for LA County?
At this time, one, we don't have authority of the county's program and it's still being built out. So I'm not sure what criteria they're going to utilize to identify whether or not somebody qualifies as a local equity applicant and what types of services would be associated with that designation. We will probably look to partner with the county as the state, as more agencies come online and start, having social equity programs, the ability for DCR to secure large grants like we were doing in the beginning when we were only one of a handful of folks that had local equity programs, the grant funding that we're receiving is starting to slowly diminish. So if we can partner with the county and we can basically put our grants together to provide more services and cover a larger geographic area, we're going to look to do that. And we've already had conversations with their office about doing that, but first they got to get their program up and running, and then they've got to bring some grant dollars to the table. But we would look to partner with them, just like we've partnered with the Los Angeles County Bar Association and others to help equity applicants.
Okay, our next question regarding abandoned applications comes from Michelle G. An abandoned application was given 1 year to refile. Is it true that the time has been extended to 3 years from the date of abandonment?
The city council has adopted a recommendation to extend it from 1 year to 3 years. Once, assuming they adopt the ordinance to effectuate that change, it will change from 1 year to 3 years. But currently local law says 1 year. Because the change, at least the recommendation, has been adopted by city council, for folks that have a status of abandoned refile, we will not be closing those records out until we get, final review of the ordinance and the adoption. So if you've been abandoned in 2022 and the change is adopted, you'll have the additional time. Ultimately, if the city attorney's office transmits the draft ordinance and council doesn't adopt it with that component, then those records would be closed out after 1 year. But as soon as the law changes, we would have the ability to effectuate the extensions.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Moving on, an additional question from Michelle G. What is the best process to follow when an abandoned application is resubmitted to meet all state deadlines and requirements? And what are those deadlines and requirements?
So if you're planning to pursue a state provisional license, you need to submit your application for a provisional license to the state by March 31st, which is the end of this month. The state has until June 30th to issue new provisional licenses. After June 30th, they're prohibited by statute from issuing new provisional licenses. They can only continue to renew existing provisionals. So if you want to pursue a provisional, you don't need anything from DCR on the front end to get into the state queue. However, you will have to achieve a status of local compliance underway on your temporary approval application in order to receive a provisional license. And you'll have to do that before June 30th. If you're working towards annual licensure and you're going to forego the provisional, we will begin accepting annual applications on Monday, May 1st. And we've really designed that process to be as efficient as possible so that we focus on time, place, and manner. We don't have a process that's duplicative of the states, and we would be able to make a recommendation to issue an annual license and adopt the corresponding environmental documents in 3 to 6 months. That's what we're aiming for. So it really depends on what type of license you're going to pursue and which state deadlines will apply to you. But, as I mentioned earlier in the Q&A, the director is using her discretion to provide fee deferrals for social equity applicants so that we could begin working on your pre-app records or your temporary approval application records immediately to help you meet those state deadlines.
Our question from Jennifer T asks, when will processes for the general public application in 2025 be established?
So the processes for the general public application will be exactly the same as whatever the process is for the social equity application records at the start of 2025. The processing difference between a general application and a social equity application is the requirement for the social equity applicants to comply with LAMC 10420 and the equity share requirements. So as part of our new process, we have the equity share review conducted on the legal business entity record, and it doesn't impact the actual application process. So once a business has been vetted as a social equity applicant, it continues to be a social equity applicant unless it's modified or no longer complies with 10420. But the application processes themselves are exactly the same. The land use requirements are exactly the same. The only thing that's different is ownership requirements and, the ability to comply with 10420. But that's all done outside of the application process.
Perfect. Terrence Y asks, are we allowed or able to apply for and obtain a license throughout the phases to invest structurally within one company or amongst multiple enterprises?
So, a single company can apply for multiple commercial cannabis licenses at one or more locations, subject to, the restrictions on, the number of licenses any one person is associated with. Alternatively, individuals can be part of multiple companies and apply for commercial cannabis licenses under multiple entities at one or more locations. Really, it's the license type and the requirements to apply for the license type that you have to be cognizant of. So, if you're a social equity applicant, you can apply for delivery, you can apply for nursery, you can apply for cultivation processor. General applicants can't apply for delivery, retail storefront, or cultivation activities at that time. But the distribution, non-volatile manufacturing, those are things that general applicants and social equity applicants can apply for. Both of those activities have the same land use requirements and distancing requirements from sensitive uses. So you could pursue more than one license at a time.
Okay. Our next question comes from Taylor B. Does an organization need to have a social equity applicant involved to apply for a license through a finding of public convenience or necessity?
Under current law, the cultivation and retail storefront commercial cannabis application processes are limited to social equity applicants. So the public convenience or necessity process is basically the city council granting DCR the authority to process an application for the applicant. So, initially, even if a general applicant got a finding of public convenience or necessity, DCR would not have the authority to process the application because it's a general applicant. So I do not believe council will consider PCN applications under current law for general applicants until 2025. And again, the law can always be amended, but for now, I think you'll have to wait till 2025 if you wanted to apply as a general applicant.
And Taylor B has a follow-up question. When applying for a finding of public convenience or necessity, can the associated social equity applicant already have a license awarded?
Yeah. So the public convenience or necessity process is available to applicants who already have licenses. The only distinction is going to be making sure that you don't exceed the number of licenses that you're allowed to pursue or be issued under the municipal code. So a person can't be associated with 3 or more retail storefronts or a combination of cultivation licenses that exceed 1.5 acres, which is the equivalent of 3 medium indoor licenses.
Okay, our next question from Edmund K. How can I expedite my application process?
I mean, for right now, DCR is not accepting expedited services requests. We are in the process of hiring multiple positions, and we do anticipate that we will fall below the 20% vacancy rate threshold, which will then trigger mandated processing timelines. Once we get below the 20% vacancy threshold, I do anticipate we'll turn the expedited services option back on so that folks can get processed quicker. For now, we are providing fee deferrals for social equity applicants through the end of April to help facilitate staff doing the review for land use compliance and then for the temporary approval application process to help get as many people what they need to comply with the state's deadlines. And then in May or June, I would anticipate expedited services will be an option again.
Our next question from Edmund asks, what other options are there for applications?
I mean, if it's a build off of the earlier question about expediting, you know, the thing for you as an applicant is really to make sure that all of your documentation is complete and consistent, and you've got all of the necessary records to move forward in the application process. So you've got, you know, your legal business entity record submitted. You've got your pre-application review record that gets deemed eligible for further processing, and then you get your temporary approval application record in. Some of the delays are just DCR waiting for payments to be processed and for payments to be recorded so that we can start working on the records. But again, the director has instructed my team to provide fee deferrals on all of the social equity records through the end of next month to ensure that we're working on the records more expeditiously and we're not waiting for payment. So I think people will see more movement and quicker movement based on the director's instruction.
Okay, our next question comes from Michael K. He says that today is his first attendance at this webinar, and is there anyone who could assist him? He's trying to get a license.
There's information about our licensing process on the DCR website, and folks can also call our general phone number, which is 213-978-0738 during business hours. And then depending on the assistance you're seeking, our folks can get you routed to the correct team within the department.
We had several individuals ask this question, and it's from Michael K., Nick S., Crystal W., and Rabin W. When is the next lottery?
I don't have an exact date for the next lottery, but I would anticipate that it would occur sometime after May 1st, because there is a need to move folks that are in the application queue into the annual licensure process to make sure that our existing businesses are getting what they need. And then, of course, we're doing additional hiring. So, you know, we'll have additional bodies on hand in May and June to start processing any applications that come from the future lottery. So more information will be shared probably next month. There's a few policy considerations, again, that the city council would like to address, and we'll see where that goes.
Thank you. Douglas W. asks, since many phase 2 social equity applicants are struggling in the overcrowded California market, and we can't sell to non-social equity people, we are forced to break leases and close down. Can you change the regulations to allow the sale of phase 2 licenses?
So a licensee has the ability to go through a entity substitution process. And through that process, the entity that you're trying to move the license to will have the opportunity to submit their own application and individually meet application requirements. And once they've met those application requirements for licensure, then basically you would cancel the license from entity A, and we would issue a license to entity B. As part of the recommendations that were recently adopted by City Council, it would eliminate the restriction in the municipal code that prohibits the transfer of a license separate and apart from the applicant or entity. Once that happens, there will be a process put in place that would allow for the direct transference of a license. And to the extent that a license has been issued and we've adopted environmental findings, when the license is transferred, it wouldn't require a new environmental review. So if you have a license, you can go through the entity substitution process. The new entity will have the ability to submit an application and independently meet the application requirements. If you don't have a license, then, unfortunately, there's no tangible asset to move.
Excuse me, we had an additional question from Douglas. With mega cultivation licenses coming to California and already too many cultivation licenses in California, can DCR not allow any more cultivation licenses in LA? Is that something DCR is willing to do? Being able to say made in LA is the only thing that helps us.
So, DCR only has the authority to issue a limited number of cultivation licenses within the city before that activity type reaches undue concentration. And then once it reaches undue concentration, it would require a public convenience or necessity finding for the city council. So I believe that we will accept applications and issue licenses up to the soft cap that we have. And then it becomes a policy matter for the need for additional licenses and whether or not the business can meet the threshold to receive a public convenience or necessity finding. And that's really going to be economic based, demand based. There's a number of different reasons, but I don't think we would preclude people from pursuing licenses based on the existing soft cap, short of an instruction from the city council to, either reduce the cap, which I don't think would be in the department's best interest because, we do rely on those caps to facilitate entity substitutions, and other things that would be necessary. So, I hope that helps.
Okay, our next question, we had similar questions from several individuals. Joseph A, Flora G, Jackson R, James R, and Bobby R. And they state, I'm an investor. There have been rumors within our group that my ownership shares can be replaced or removed by a social equity partner who owns 51%. Form 4004 modification requires notarized signature from an owner, but the form 4005 mod allows SEIA 51% to remove owners by changing entity without previous owner's signatures. Is this accurate? Can I be replaced or removed without my consent?
So, my first caveat is DCR does not get involved in ownership disputes. And, if you believe you're in an ownership dispute, I would recommend consulting an attorney. That being said, ownership modifications just require a simple majority of the owners to sign off. So in instances where a single individual is a majority owner of the entity, they have the ability to initiate the modification process for that entity. The modification process for that entity is really the business telling us what changes were made. Whether or not you're a true owner of the business is not for DCR to decide. If you have equity in the business, you have shares in the business, the modification process doesn't move that. All we're doing is updating our regulatory records based on what the business is telling us and what the owners on file are telling us. For the application process, when we don't do modifications on applications. So, that is something that you can only do when the application record is actually abandoned. As part of the refiling process, social equity individual applicants that have been selected through phase 3 retail round 1, the round 2 lottery, have the ability to refile as a different entity, but they're submitting a brand new application and then they're giving us information associated with that new application record.
Thank you, Jason. Moving on, we have a question from Omar R. The Q&A from February 15th mentioned applicants, phase 3, round 1 retail, could be moved to another community plan area with application slots available? What is the process? What documents are needed to move forward with relocation to another CPA?
So the in air quotes relocation of an application is done through the refiling process. So if you don't have site control and you submit your business premises surrender form, DCR may abandon your application record, which could then, be refiled once you have the status of abandoned -refile. At that time, you would be able to refile the application in any community plan area that has not reached undue concentration. So that would be the way to facilitate moving the application from the existing community plan area to a different community plan area, not subject to a finding of undue concentration. It's a refiling, and it's through the abandoned refile process.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Rick H asks, how can I get a type 9 property? Every time I inquire for a business space, I get rejected by realtors and property owners. What should I do?
I would keep looking. I mean, there are, landlords that are looking for tenants that are going to operate commercial cannabis businesses. And, for the type 9 license type, really just look at LEMC 105 and where the license type can be located, and then make sure that your proposed properties are all properly distanced. And really the sky's the limit once you understand the zoning rules and the distancing rules, because there are thousands of properties within the city that could comply with the type 9 requirements.
Thank you. Paul T asks, can verified social equity applicants still get a retail license? Can it be done by March 31st, 2023?
I mean, it's a two-part question. The answer is yes. Verified social equity individual applicants and social equity applicants can still pursue the retail storefront license type. Can it be done by March 31st, 2023? If you're pursuing a provisional state license, you could submit your application to them by the deadline. And then if you do, the state does have until June 30th to issue new provisional licenses. So you could navigate through the pre-application review process and the temporary approval process with DCR and get your status of local compliance underway before June 30th. But if you are thinking about applying, you need to make sure that you get your application into the state by March 31st. And as the state processes your application, at some point, they're going to reach out to DCR and ask whether or not you have a status of local compliance underway. And we've started our environmental review, and you need to be in our application queue for us to say yes. So if you're not already in the queue, you'll have to make some business decisions about whether or not you want to pursue the provisional license, or you want to wait until May 1st when the annual application process opens.
Thank you, Jason. Our next question comes from Jackson R. My application has an expiration of August 25th, 2023. Can I request more time to find property with new investors?
So that's kind of the intent of the abandoned refile process. So if your application times out, then it would be deemed abandoned, and with the proposed extension, it would give you up to 3 years to refile. So that would hopefully give you sufficient time to find a compliant property, find investors, and then come back into the DCR process.
Our next question comes from Bobby R. Can a type 10 retail approved application from phase 3 round 1 open a location in any of the 15 districts in the city of LA with application slots available.
So just a couple of quick things. So the 15 council districts is not the way the retail licenses are allocated. Our retail license opportunities are allocated based on community plan area, and there's 35 community plan areas. If you navigate to DCR's website, we have a licensing map under the licensing, which will show you the different community plan areas, and you can get information about which community plan areas are subject to a finding of undue concentration. Currently, approximately 30 of the community plans are open, and DCR has the authority to continue issuing licenses until we reach undue concentration in those areas. And through the refiling process, you have an opportunity to move from whatever community plan area your existing phase 3 retail round 1 record was associated with to a different community plan area that's not subject to a finding of undue concentration.
Our next question comes from Michael. I need to change my password and change my email to my portal, and I'm very new and I can't find a place to log in. What do I do?
So when you navigate to the portal, in the upper right-hand corner is where you find either the login information, or it'll be on the center of the screen if you go to the portal homepage. If you don't have your password, there's password reset options that would be available. If you don't remember your secret word or the answer to your secret question, then you will have to reach out to the department to facilitate a password change. Virtual meetings can be set up by requesting a password reset through DCR licensing at lacity.org. Alternatively, our public counter is open Tuesday and Wednesday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And you could walk in and our team at the front desk could help facilitate a password reset. Just make sure you have your government issued identification with you so that we can match it up with the system, and then we can help you regain access to your account. And even when we do them virtually, we'll ask for you to, show on camera your identification so we can match it with that user information on our records.
Thanks, Jason. Sesame F asks, how long does a land use review take?
It depends on the type of review. Generally we don't start doing the land use review until the payment has been received. And it could take 2 to 4 weeks to complete the review. For now, what we're going to be doing is providing fee deferrals so that we can immediately begin the land use review. I think there's less than 20 records that have the retail storefront activity associated with it, whether it's new phase 3 round 1s or refiled round, or new phase 3 retail round 2s or refiled phase 3 retail round 1s in the queue. And those will all be cleared by Friday of this week. And with the new deferral process going into place, we should be able to turn around land use review much more quickly, because we don't have to wait for the payment to be applied. We can go ahead and start working on it. And the director is the person to thank for that.
Jason, I'm just noticing the time that it's at the 1 o'clock hour, and just checking in with you.
If you've still got capacity, we can probably go for at least another 15 minutes. And I don't have my next meeting until 1:30. So I'll work around your calendar and your schedule.
Okay, we'll go for another few and check in with staff at the same time. Our next question is from Michael C. Can I apply for a micro business as an SEIA? If so, how do I apply?
So at the local level, we don't have a license type for micro business like the state. At the local level, you have to apply for any activity you plan to engage in. So micro business at the local level is a type of retail license, and it could be retail with on-site sales, i.e. a retail storefront, or it could be non-storefront delivery, which is off-site sales. And really, it's just the zoning that differentiates whether you would get a retail license or a micro business retail license or a delivery license or a delivery micro business license. The only difference is really the zoning. So you have to be a social equity applicant, and you have to be eligible to either apply for, retail with on-site sales through either phase 3, round 1, round 2, or a future lottery, or a social equity applicant to apply for the non-storefront delivery. When the state reaches out to us, if you do have multiple activities, we will, tell the state what activities you have. And, that may allow for you to qualify for a micro business license at the state level, which doesn't have to be retail. It could just be a combination of 3 different activities. So our definition of micro business is different than what the state has for their micro business license.
Okay, our next question from Anthony T. Can applicants still receive local compliance underway by March 31st? And can a sole proprietor submit for pre-application review without an entity record?
Good question. So you don't have to have a status of local compliance underway by March 31st, 2023. You just need to submit your provisional license application to the state by their deadline. And then you'll need to secure the status of local compliance underway before June 30th of 2023. So, if to the extent that you've got your legal business entity record created, that will help facilitate. If you're applying as a sole proprietor, you are not required to have a legal business entity record at this time. But come May 1st, when we roll out the annual application, sole props will have to also have legal business entity records, because that's the record type that facilitates the transference of the license once that recommendation becomes law. So not a requirement now for sole props to have an LBER. It will be a requirement starting May 1st, which hopefully will be after the date that the council adopts the city attorney's ordinance and it becomes effective. You don't need local compliance underway by March 31st. You need it by June 30th, and you can get it by, submitting the temporary approval after you've cleared the pre-app review process. And if you are a social equity individual applicant, again, we will be providing fee deferrals for pre-app review and the temporary approval application review to help facilitate moving people through and being eligible to meet the state deadlines.
Pamela T is asking, when will DCR reopen SEIA verification requests?
Again, this is going to be a policy related matter. We will be transmitting a report looking to streamline the verification process. And, we're going to give, of course, the city council an opportunity to weigh in and either adopt or reject those policies before we reopen that process. But later this year, I anticipate it will be reopened.
Okay. Rodney B asks, are additional licenses available for African Americans?
So the municipal code sets the criteria for who can apply, and factors such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation are not any of the factors that DCR uses to determine whether or not somebody can apply for a license. And, to the extent that those factors were utilized, it may be considered unconstitutional. If you're looking for the criteria for the verification process for social equity individual applicants or for general applicants, I would just refer you to Municipal Code Section 104.
Thanks, Jason. Our next question from Rodney B asks, How much capital investment do I need to get started?
It's really going to depend on what activity that you're applying for, as well as, what type of footprint you're trying to have for your business. The social equity team, headed by Dr. Brown, did a equity event last 2 weeks ago, and they had different investors, folks that were looking to invest capital in these businesses, providing webinars or providing panels and information to help social equity individual applicants better understand what it would take to try to raise capital, and even what to look for. So I would recommend reaching out to the social equity team and seeing whether or not there's information from their large event at the convention center that they could provide to you to basically better understand the capital investment implications of different activities, or how to get started.
Our next question from Gilbert M. asks, are a portion of cannabis profits used as tax write-offs? And then additionally, how will profits be taxed?
I would recommend consulting a tax attorney. Given the federal prohibition on commercial cannabis activity, the traditional business write-offs are not available to most commercial cannabis businesses, but a professional tax attorney would be able to, provide you guidance and maybe help you understand ways to limit your tax liability.
Thanks, Jason. Irvin H. asks, how do I submit for a provisional license?
So a state provisional license would be through the Department of Cannabis Control, and they also use the Excella platform for their online portal process. For temporary approval records, you would submit it through the Department of Cannabis Regulation licensing portal, which is also on the Excella platform. So the Department of Cannabis Control, and hopefully somebody on my team can share the link, has the links to apply for a license, which will take you to their portal that you'll have to register for. And then you can go ahead and use their online portal to submit your provisional license application information.
Okay. Razy asks, is there anything being done at the local and state levels to reduce cannabis taxes?
I mean, there's policy discussions that are occurring at the local and at the state level to talk about what the cannabis taxes are, and how different government entities could help provide relief to cannabis businesses. Generally when I've been in the room for those discussions, everybody's always looking at another agency to reduce their taxes and not actually looking at ways to locally reduce taxes, like for whatever agency has the tax. The mayor and city council do have the discretion to reduce, whether it's temporary or permanently, the tax rates that were adopted by the voters. They don't have the authority to go beyond or above the adopted tax rates, but they do have the discretion to either temporarily or permanently reduce those. But DCR does not have any say in what those tax rates are, nor do we directly benefit from the collection of cannabis business taxes.
Thanks, Jason. I just wanted to let you know I checked with our staff and we can hang on until 1:20. Are you good with that?
Yeah, let's try to get through as many questions. I'll be as concise as possible.
And I'll ask fast. Rabin W asks, why does it take so long to cash a check once it's received for payment of an invoice?
There's a specific process in place that requires Office of Finance to validate the legitimacy of the invoice and make sure that everything in the back end has been set up to match DCR records. We're in the process of creating an e-payment solution that would automate some of that. And the director will most likely be announcing a new partnership with the Office of Finance to basically pre-vet our applicants for walk-in services, so that once we've verified with finance that they've set up the taxpayer account and it matches the activities on the invoice, folks could just walk in between scheduled times to remit their payment. And then, of course, if you do it at the counter, everything is processed right then and there. And then within a day or two, the payment will basically be closed out, updated, and be reflected. So, you know, our director has been meeting with Deanna, who's the director of the Office of Finance, to come up with a more efficient process to hopefully get these payments processed more expeditiously so that we can begin working on records coming in. And again, if you're a social equity applicant, the director has instructed us to provide fee deferrals so that we can immediately begin working on stuff while, you know, the payment processes are moving forward so that we can help people meet the state deadlines.
Okay, Surge H. Will the DCR give round two guys a deadline extension to find a location, since the DCR map has pending apps that disqualify most good areas that need to be looked at or abandoned?
There's currently a statutory deadline set for how long somebody has the opportunity to begin the pre-application review process. And then, you know, once you've cleared the pre-application review process, then you have the opportunity to submit an application. And if unfortunately you don't get site control or that record gets abandoned, then you would have up to 3 years, hopefully, to refile once the new ordinance gets adopted to extend the refiling from 1 year to 3 years. So there's a few different mechanisms to naturally extend your period of time to comply. And, you know, we're always looking for feedback on the processes to make them easier to understand. So if you have questions, please reach out to either the licensing team or the social equity team for your specific record, and we can look at it and provide you more targeted information.
Okay, Janet L. As far as current payment practices for cannabis-related businesses, what is allowed?
I mean, the Office of Finance, you know, takes all traditional payment methods and will be implementing an e-payment solution that links with the LA tax system so that folks can make payments online. So the current payment practice right now is for folks to remit payment to the Office of Finance. They can either mail in payments, they can schedule an appointment to go in and remit payment. And then we will be working on an e-payment solution.
Jason, the next question is, are cannabis non-storefront retailer, for example, delivery, required to have workers' compensation for delivery drivers?
I would recommend reaching out to an attorney so that you as a business understand what your obligations are based on your entity structure and, you know, the way that you're actually employing folks. You know, unfortunately, DCR can't provide you guidance or business advice on that specific question.
Okay, our next question from Alan F. Are there any templates for letters of intent to lease commercial property available to recipients?
So as it relates to our process, there's a landowner authorization form that needs to be signed by the owner of the property, or whoever the landlord is going to be, and that's available on our website. In terms of contracts between a tenant and a landlord, DCR doesn't provide any business advice. You may be able to get advice through the partnership with the Los Angeles County Bar Association. They have pro bono legal services for social equity individual applicants. And they may be better able to assist you if it's not related to one of our forms or documents.
Do you have time for one more, Jason?
I sure do.
Okay. This one comes anonymously. It says, what happens if an applicant submits a state license application and then the city of LA determines that the address premises listed on the applicant's state license application does not comply with local regulations regarding zoning / setbacks?
So, I mean, in those events, when the state reaches out for a status of local compliance underway, we would notify the state that that entity and that at that location is not in compliance. And then the state will not issue a provisional license at that location. Again, the state and the city have completely different application processes. The state does reach out to us to verify local compliance before they issue a provisional license. If we tell them local compliance is underway, which means we've got your application before if you've already cleared the pre-application review process, they'll go ahead and issue the provisional license. If if you don't clear our pre-application review process, which is where we do the zoning and the setback review, then we would report a not in compliance status, which means the state will not issue a provisional license, or they shouldn't issue a provisional license.
Okay, Jason, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if there's one more question, maybe we could sneak it in before the clock turns to 20.
Okay. When you say a licensee can submit a license transfer request or other license modification requests, does the term licensee include an entity with temporary approval?
Temporary approval is a form of licensure. So when I say licensee, it includes businesses that have been issued temporary approval.
Perfect. We got through about 60 questions. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for hosting and conducting it. And do you know the date that we're going to do the next Q&A session?
I do in my calendar, if you give me 1 second. That will be April 12th.
Wonderful. So I look forward to doing another round of Q&A with folks on Wednesday, April 12th. So thanks everybody for tuning in today, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye. And thank you, Gidget, for moderating this.
No problem. Thank you.